We'd like to start the regular press conference by Minister Hayashi. Minister, the floor is yours. Thank you. I would like to talk about provision of vaccines by Japan. Up until now, Japan has provided more than 40 million doses of novel coronavirus vaccines externally. This time around, through the COVAX facility, we're offering 500,000 doses to Tajikistan and 7,000 doses to Tonga of AstraZeneca vaccines that were manufactured here in Japan. And this decision was made. As far as Tajikistan is concerned, this will be the first supply of vaccines from Japan to Central Asia. Vaccines to Tonga has already arrived on the ground today. As for Tajikistan, whenever the preparations are done, we plan to transport them. To bring novel coronavirus under control, it is important to promote equal access and spread of vaccines around the world. We will continue to provide them while taking into consideration the domestic production and the usage of vaccines, the status of the infection in various countries and regions, as well as the level of demand. That is all from my side.
Thank you very much. Now we would like to move on to questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand. And once you're appointed, please go near the microphone and state your name and affiliation before you ask your question. My name is Abe from Yomiuri newspaper. I'd like to ask about the Ukraine situation. There is increasing tension in the Ukraine. In the West, various countries are having high-level diplomatic activities amongst the top leaders. So, as Japan, what kind of high-level activities do you plan to take? And in addition to that, the current latest on-site, Japanese residents on-site, what is the situation and their evacuation status? And also to the Ukrainian government about the establishment of the liaison office to coordinate. Thank you very much. Concerning the surrounding areas near the boundary of Ukraine, with the military reinforcement by Russia, there is increasing tension. Now we cannot predict what will happen by the diplomatic efforts of various relevant countries. On the other hand, there still is a likelihood that the situation may worsen quickly, and the government has a strong sense of alarm. We are watching the situation with great concern. And as Japan, Ukraine's sovereignty as well as territory integrity has been consistently supported. And together with G7 and other international society, we will collaborate with them, inclusive of diplomacy. We would like to take various measures in order to take appropriate measures. At the same time, with this situation in mind, on February 11th, inclusive of the capital city of Kiev, the Ukraine danger level has been lifted to level 4, that is evacuation advisory, and we have advised the Japanese living in Ukraine to evacuate, and we have established a countermeasure office on the same day in Mofa. The government is taking utmost efforts in order to secure safety of the Japanese residents there, and we have been issuing consular mail as well, and we have been contacting them by telephone as well. We have persistently recommended recommendation on the 13th as well. There has been another consular mail issued to strongly advise for evacuation. So we will continue to make the utmost efforts in order to secure the safety of the Japanese residents, taking into consideration the local situation. And in Ukraine, also in Lviv as well, a temporary liaison office has been established, and they will also be dealing with Japanese protection operations. Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm Maibara from Asahi Shimbun. I would like to ask about Ukraine. This evening, I understand that between Russia, you're going to have a meeting of the co-chairs of the Japan-Russia government-level meeting, and I understand that you'll be participating. Well, to have this high-level exchange with Russian counterparts at this timing, is this appropriate? Are you going to communicate your concerns over the situation in Ukraine at this meeting? Thank you. Yes, indeed. We are planning to hold the meeting of the co-chairs of the Japan-Russia government-level committee meeting on trade and economy this evening. We plan to exchange views about various issues pertaining to the economy between Japan and Russia. As far as the Ukraine situation is concerned, we've consistently supported the sovereignty as well as the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And at the U.S.-Japan Foreign Ministers meeting on February 11th, we agreed to closely coordinate between the countries about the situation in Ukraine. We'll continue to respond accordingly through close coordination with the international community, inclusive of the G7. Now, I cannot prejudge the outcome and the substance of the discussion at the meeting today. But in any event, bearing in mind the situation with regard to the Ukraine and our position, we will respond accordingly and appropriately. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please. Thank you very much. So I have another question concerning sanctions. From Blinken, Secretary of State has been talking about sanctions, that we should take the same measures, and there's been a request. Was there a request? And if not, as Japan, what is your view of the current situation? We do understand that you will be collaborating closely, but in 2014, Crimea, Japan took a different role. There was different sanctions compared to other countries. So is there going to be a difference this time? And what would it be if there is? Japan, U.S., and G7, as we mentioned earlier, as you said, there will be close collaboration. And at this point in time, we are strongly requesting that there will be a solution through diplomatic negotiations, even if there is military invasion by Russia, inclusive of Japan imposing sanctions based on what actually occurs. We will collaborate with the international society, inclusive of G7, to take appropriate measures. And concerning what is actually being done, then the coordination thereof, because of the nature of the issue, I would like to refrain from commenting.
Nishimura-san, please go ahead with your question. Thank you. Nishimura from Radio France. I would like to ask about the border control measures. From last week, major newspapers, based on the leakage of government officials, have hinted the substance of possible relaxation of the border control measures. Prime Minister Kishida and also Chief Cabinet Secretary Mr. Matsuno, in the press conferences, have not made any clear statements on this matter. For the exchange students, this is a very cruel situation because they're directly affected. The government, for whom? What are they considering and for whom? And when is the government going to be ready to make some sort of announcement about the relaxation of border control measures? Thank you. As far as the outlook for the border control measures are concerned, as the Prime Minister mentioned in his doorstep interview on the 12th, as far as the government is concerned, we intend to continue on with the current policy and measures until the end of February. The basic policy is that as the situation is changing, accumulation of scientific knowledge against Omicron, including variants, have been made, and changes in the situation predicting infection in and out of Japan, and the status of control measures outside Japan, taking into consideration all these factors in comprehensive fashion against the overall COVID-19 countermeasures, we are pursuing consideration toward possible relaxation. That is what we are pursuing at this moment. Now, as far as the timing is concerned, you asked about the timing. The government has been making comprehensive discussions and consideration based on the perspectives of which I just outlined, and they're in the midst of the consideration as we speak. So the government, the government will continue to make necessary and appropriate measures accordingly. Thank you.
But it's already been released in the press. It was more specific. There was more specific information in the press. Is that fact? So what you are considering, is it what is written in the papers? Yes, as I mentioned earlier on, the government overall is taking necessary and appropriate measures. And we are considering this, as I mentioned. At this point in time, no decision has been made.
Next question, please. Thank you, Jimbo-san. Please go ahead. Thank you. I'm sure that there are comments that you cannot make, but I would like to hear about your thoughts as Japan. Do you believe it's important for the allies to be in sync, or do you believe that you should take into account effective sanctions? Is that the priority? Can you clarify that for us, please? Thank you. Yes, this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, and this might be a repetition of what I mentioned. But the premise is that we want to seek solution through diplomatic means. And hypothetically speaking, in the event that there should be a military invasion by Russia, then, inclusive of the possibility of imposing economic sanctions, in light of the situation that actually occurred, Japan will be responding in an appropriate manner through coordination with the international community, inclusive of the G7. So it's a repetition of the comment that I made earlier. Thank you.
So I also have a question concerning the Ukraine. So as mentioned, concerning the Intergovernmental Committee on Trade and Economy, I think Japan as well has committed a statement concerning G7, so international pressure is going to be raised. So by having this meeting, for example, the international situation, also Japan diplomacy, maybe the stance will differ slightly. So what is your view? How do you digest this concerning this committee in this situation? So what is your positioning of having this kind of meeting? Is there no contradiction? So as I mentioned earlier on, it is exactly as I mentioned earlier on concerning the situation in the Ukraines. We have consistently supported the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Ukraines, and it is exactly as I mentioned earlier on. So from that perspective, tonight there will be a meeting of co-chairs. Based on the position concerning the Ukraine situation, we would like to take appropriate measures. It is exactly as I mentioned earlier on. This will be the last question.
Please go ahead. Thank you. Sugimoto from Sankei Shimbun newspaper. I'd like to go back to the initial question. You did not respond to the initial question. With regard to high-level dialogue, be it in the United States or be it the Quad, I know that you have had very busy diplomatic schedule up until now. Now, in the meantime, as far as Europe is concerned, be it Europe or Central or Middle East, I believe high-level dialogue with leaders of these countries are not that evident. Is that sufficient, do you believe? And going forward, how do you intend to pursue high-level dialogue with leaders of these regions going forward? I would appreciate your response. As I mentioned earlier, inclusive of the G7 and international community, we want to coordinate with the international community through inclusive of the G7, and at all levels, we will respond accordingly. That is what I mentioned earlier. So naturally, all levels include the levels that you referred to earlier. Thank you.
Since there are no more questions, we would like to end today's meeting. Thank you very much.